Okay, good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. Getting a late start on things here today, although I did practice the piano already. Uh, so today I've been coming across some material that I find a little troubling, but not that awfully troubling. It's really it's a who cares thing, really. Does anybody really care about post World War One and pre World War Two anymore? I don't think so. And so on and so forth. But I'm going to do something slightly different. When I do put this on Bluetooth, not Bluetooth, Bluebird Semaphore, which is my site on YouTube, I'm going to click that it's not made for children. I've been clicking made for children for quite some time now, and I did find out a long time ago that seems to prohibit people who want maybe to send me a message through YouTube. If they follow certain procedures, that I would get it. I mean, once you say it's made for children, you don't get that opportunity. And after a while having YouTube, maybe a couple of 3 years, I decided to change it to made for children. I didn't see an upside or a downside to it, except that I wouldn't be getting any messages. Now, I always assumed that made for children meant that they were going to protect children from the predators that are out there. And God knows they're all over the internet. Why those politicians 10, 15, 20 years ago allowed the internet to take on the form that it did take on, which, right away people were being harmed by the internet. And, like I said, the politicians said, yeah, let them go. Let's do it. Money, money, money. So now you have children in serious trouble. But I can't do anything about that. But the long and the short of it is, this video, I'm going to change it to that it's not made for children, meaning it's made for adults. There's not going to be any of that adult content stuff. My stuff is for serious people, not always serious, but people who are beyond the stage of childhood, for sure, and people who may know a lot more than children would know about the world, both its history and its present state of affairs. So we're going to do that. I'm afraid that when people look at the what I'm posting and they see it's made for children, and they're not going to be interested in seeing it. So I'm going to deviate from that now. I'm going to make a sharp right, maybe a left. I don't know, but I'm going to make a turn in a new direction, and we'll see what happens. But today, there's about 4 items I want to talk about. 2 or 3 of them are related to books I'm reading, and I have talked a little bit about them already. But before I even do that, I want to mention my dislike of what I'm seeing, and this is for over a period of time. I'll turn on my computer in the morning, and lo and behold, the symbol for being connected to the internet is active. Now, I never leave the internet up when I shut down. I always make sure I shut down the internet. Always. And it just happens too often. It happened today, connected to the internet. So, what I do in that case, before I do anything, I get on my computer and I disconnect from that connection. There's no reason or rhyme for me to be doing that except knowing a little bit about, you know, digital type of transmission, which is basically what they do, of course, on the internet, HTTP and all that good stuff, TCP/IP, etc., etc. I'm figuring there's a minor chance that connection I see in these cases, they are aware via TCP/IP, one of the internet protocols, networking protocols. They're aware of my little data string. It has a number, and that's how they keep in touch with everybody, all the packets flying around the internet. It's got a TCP/IP number, so if they're going to send it somewhere, they've recorded that in those servers at the IP provider's space, and they send you your information. And when you send information out, they tag it with your TCP/IP address. This is fun. I have no problems with that. It's a protocol. It's used, but it might be inappropriately being used in my case, or in cases of others, where some hacker type knows how to get TCP up and running, even on a computer that's turned off. Now it's not strange to me, because we know that these entities, whether they're the IP service providers, the governments, who knows, they can access a turned off computer. We know that. We see it every day. You know, they do software upgrades on your computer when your computer is turned off overnight. You know that. They do that. So they have access to us all the time. And even that, I mean, I think that's wrong, but that's what they do. You know, and they've probably argued their case in front of government agencies, and of course the government supports the big guy who gives them the idea that it's the only way they can really get all of the people upgraded, because a lot of people like me are not going to respond positively to their requests. They want me to do something, send me some money, and maybe I'll do something. But I don't want to come off like I'm crazy about this. But the point is that, you know, they can do that to your phone. They can do anything. They get in there, they do whatever they want. So I'm upset that some entity is getting in my computer when it's turned off at night, and they might be using TCP/IP and other methods of tagging the packets that go out over the internet from a destination and a sent point of view. Sent from this address, going to that address, back and forth. It's a great protocol. It's not that complicated. They kept things simple. But when they do it ad infinitum, you know, then it can start to be complicated. However, today, when this video is done, and I put it up there, I'm going to put it up there that it's made for adults. It's not made for children. And we'll see what happens. I don't expect the going away of getting into the internet, getting this thing exposed overnight when the computer is turned off. I don't expect that to go away. That's something that seemingly now is embedded in our culture, including your so-called smart TVs, which is really a misnomer, because if you have basic kind of services from your TV providers, I mean, there's nothing but stupid shows on those channels. Stupid. So I don't know how to call it smart TV, because it's stupid TV. Gosh. And so on. So that was the first topic I wanted to talk about, was the intrusion into PCs that are turned off, and the intrusions into cell phones that may or may not be turned off, and all the things they can do. Quite frankly, recently, I'm blaming it on that they got into my cell phone and they changed the setting. And it took me quite some time to find that setting. I was not able to make outgoing phone calls or receive phone calls. And the setting, I only fortuitously came upon that setting. It didn't really sound like a major telephony type of setting. But after a long time, I said, I'm just going to go for it, change this, see what happens. I changed it, and my telephone service started working again. And although I was being somewhat pressured to call the phone service provider, I, I desperately avoided that because I don't need to be upset. I don't need to have that aggravation of calling these people. So fortunately, I did solve the problem without having to revert to a help desk, where it's just, you can't get any more annoying. So let's go on to the other subject. The other subjects are these books I've been reading. The one, I believe, is just simply, it's a biography of Gertrude Bell, and she's noted as the Queen of the Desert. I don't recall who wrote it. The other is called China, Captive or Free. I do remember that guy's name, Gilbert Reed. And one that I finished a while back, and it's simply about Lawrence of Arabia. It might have a subtitled Hero, not sure. But what I wanted to point out was that, and I've already said this in one of the postings about Gertrude Bell, that she came from phenomenal riches, phenomenal wealth. That family was probably richer than any of the kings or queens and dukes and all that stuff in English. They were an English family. And so that whatever she wanted to do, she did. So it wasn't like a big deal. She wanted to, build up a caravan and troop through the desert. She just bought it and she did it. There was no real genius involved. None. She may have been smart. I'll give you that. I really don't know. Just because she took a first at Oxford doesn't really mean to me necessarily that she's endowed with great intelligence. Stranger things have happened besides getting a first at Oxford. So I continue to read, and she's, the people who talk about it like she walks on water. Well, let me tell you, she's walking on anything over there in Arabia. She's walking on sand. But, and first of all, the author seems happy about the fact that she's sitting in tents with numerous Arab folks smoking marijuana and other sorts of hallucinogenic drugs. He thinks that's great. Hey, now there's two problems with that. One, you're mucking with your mind. And two, you're supposed to be a science type and you're going native. And that's never a good thing. It's never applauded by the scientific community. And we can point out instances where people have done that and they've been they're ostracized by the scientific community. Like I'm getting stuff coming up that I don't want, and that's going to be a horror to get rid of this. There, I got rid of it. Okay, so that's the kind of stuff that they send to you without you asking them to send you anything. But the point is that you can get ostracized for going native, but in Gertrude Bell's case, because she was so wealthy, she could do no wrong. Everything she did, everybody was joyful about. Now, my classic example of somebody being ostracized for going native was a young recent PhD grad from the University of Michigan back in the late 60s, I think it was. It could have been early 60s, but I do believe it was in the 60s. He graduated, he got his doctorate, his PhD, excuse me, and he was so excited because now he is finally going to be able to go to Venezuela and see the people he'd been studying through books. He was going to see the Yanomami, which translates to the fierce people. So he gets himself over there. He's about ready to go in the village of these people. And their villages were always surrounded by a corral of wood, okay? Very intermeshed, you couldn't, a thicket, okay? Think of a thicket that was constructed around their village. The type of corral that some native cultures would use to keep their cattle penned. So he goes there, he figures out where the opening is, and he pulls back some of these thickets, and the Yanomami come out. And boy, did he get a grand rude awakening. They were really very fierce looking, very intimidating. They were, always blowing some kind of hallucinogenic up their nose, and they always had this green snot coming out of their noses. Anyway, he got extremely terrified by these people. But long and short of it, he did eventually learn to tolerate that kind of stuff. And what he did do, eventually he did go native. I believe he married a Yanomami woman. And he tried to learn their culture, their social mores, how to get married, how to eat, how to have sex, all that stuff. That anthropologist is just over the top fond of researching. Like really, who cares? But they do, obviously, and the colleges do, because they can get a whole other department up and running and pay a lot more salaries and ask for a lot more grants from the government. So there are people supporting this whole idea of going native and what have you, although the pure scientists don't. They didn't then. I don't know what the status is now. I really don't keep up with, contemporary anthropology. I think it became just a little more too technical for me. I liked it when the fellow with the name, I think it was Colin Roper, was writing stuff like the people of the mountains, and Leakey was writing about his stuff in the Olduvai Gorge, and people who had, maintained their scientific integrity and were doing the research. Another famous fellow, and I can't think of his name, is the guy who wrote Ishi, which was, or who was, the last Native American to be taken into captivity out in California about 1911 or something like that. I can't think of the fellow's name, but it's a very interesting story. So, I'm really into that. Once they get too technical and they're counting genes and that kind of stuff, and they're keeping track of the families and what have you, which group is married to what group, and that, it gets a little tedious. So I stopped being too interested in it. But for the bulk of my concerning myself with anthropology and primitive societies, it wasn't like that, and so there was plenty of good reading to be done on these folks, all over the world. No place excluded. And in some cases, particularly, I mean, I seem to be caught up with the idea that in and above the North Pole, and in around the North Pole, the Eskimos and the units, whatever they are, units, Inuits, all those folks. There's at least a number of examples of people going native, and I was able to stick with that because I think the lifestyles of those people are so minimal. If you go native, there's not really much you're going to do. You're going to catch a seal, chew on some blubber, and imagine that your Inuit girlfriend is beautiful. So you'll learn a lot too with those studying those people. Anyway, where I'm headed with this is is that going native is frowned upon by the scientific community. And once again, I have to admit, is it still being frowned upon? Maybe not. Maybe they tell you go into the interiors of the Middle and Near East and smoke dope until you turn blue, because that's the way to go over there. So I don't know what they do anymore. I don't know. The world basically, in my estimation, has gone berserk, and we see it everywhere. However, it's not for me to say. I shouldn't be passing judgment on other people, but I should simply say that there was a time that going native was frowned upon. Another good case in point is what happened to David Rockefeller. The talk that I came across was that he tried to go native over there. And he got his upcomings or whatever it is. There's a lot of theories about what happened to him. So this Gertrude Bell, she tried to go native. And one of the distinguishing characteristics of these people who go into foreign countries and think they're going to save them, who are going to show them the right ways to live. Once they get involved in that, they're very quick to defend their new-founded culture and besmirch their old cultures, the old cultures that they came from. Gertrude never had an unkind word to say about the people who lived in Arabia. She's given a lot of credit for outlining the way nations would be created in that area of the world. She's given a lot of credit. And yet, going forward from when she was doing that, and she was doing that, I can't say exactly when, 20s, 30s, but she was doing that, and the history of that place, even right now, Iran shooting missiles at Israel, but the whole history of that place it was never tamed, never. Okay, those people continued to live in the dark ages, and yet she was praised as the second coming in the establishing of superior cultures in the Middle East and all around that place. Whereas we know for sure that is not the case. We know they still have their awful laws. They still kill as retribution. They're still in the mindset that Israel needs to be eradicated. And and Gertrude Bell was part of the European gangs that took the Middle East and made it what it is today. I want to say the Brits, but the French were guilty of this too. They did all the wrong things over there after World War II, all the wrong things. And when it came to the fact that it was going to cost them too much money to try to keep that place up and running for themselves, they turned it loose on the world and they told America, hey, go over there, clean it up, whatever it costs you, we don't care. You got the money, you pay for it, you clean it up, you can have the oil, sell some of it to us, we don't care. And so we inherited those problems. Okay? Now, did the Brits send their soldiers and involve them in the Iraqi wars of the 70s, 80s, 90s? Yes, they did. So I can't totally write them off as having turned their backs on the whole area. But they disgracefully did what they did after World War II, and then let those nations become self-governing and turn the place into a quagmire of killing. All the poor people, because it's the people that get killed, you know. Occasionally, a Saddam Hussein gets killed, or whatever that tall dude's name was, Ben Saddam, Ben whatever. You know who I'm talking about. So occasionally, some of them get killed. The Fossil, the brothers got it early on, I think in the 50s. They were assassinated. So my takeaway from reading about Gertrude Bell is that she's no saint. She just fortuitously had billions and billions of dollars at her beck and call, and she used that to go tramping around in the desert, taking photographs. Hey, you give me $1 billion, I'll go take photographs anyway, you know, a lot of them, and it'll be good. I'm not a bad photographer, you know. I'll write up a few essays on this place. You give me $1 billion, I'll do it. It's no big deal. You know, but they make her out to be the queen of the desert. Heinous. So I probably could go on more, but I want to point out that her similar number at the time was Thomas Edward Lawrence, T.E. Lawrence. He was a young archaeologist, also out of Oxford, who was doing field work in the Middle East. I want to say it was, well, you know, it's pretty close to Syria, close to Anatolia, all those places. He was doing, in one famous spot particularly, he was doing his digging. And he would go on his own, search out into the desert, but he didn't have $1 billion backing him up. He might get some used pieces of equipment, a few donkeys, maybe a camel here and a camel there, and he would go out and he would do the research was needed to be an archaeologist. So there's a famous story, I believe, in the book on Gertrude Bell, that they met up. And right away, Gertrude had an MO of, if she was in front of somebody, particularly for the first time, and that somebody was a well-known somebody, she would just pour it out. She would just start gushing all she knew about the place and other places. Okay? She must not have been a very sure of herself type, because that behavior says you're not sure of yourself. So Lawrence let her go on and on and on. And then when she was done, he gave her a history lesson, a 30-minute history lesson in the archaeology of the Middle East. And when he was done, I guess the word would be she was flabbergasted. She never said another word. So Lawrence was the real deal, and Gertrude wasn't. And Lawrence didn't have, although he admired the Arabs, but when they mucked up, he didn't praise them. He wasn't praising them all the time. He wasn't their biggest fan. He admired a lot of what they did, and he actually liked living in the desert. He kind of warmed up to that. But when the need for being in the desert was over, he went back to England. He didn't turn on his roots. He didn't say, "Oh, Arab is good and English is bad." He didn't do that. He went back to England. He liked England. Look at Clouds Hill. All right. So the two are not the same thing. They're equated a lot. Now with Reed, I said Gilbert Reed, he's the one on China. And if something comes in my mind about Arabia and that stuff, while I'm talking about China, I'll just put it out there. I'm not worried about being in sync. Anyway, so Gilbert Reed was a missionary. And I say that and emphasize it because, to me, the missionaries created a lot of harm in the world. There were good ones and bad ones, no doubt, but they harmed the people in these countries. They harmed them. And so Gilbert Reed, who wrote this book, China, what was it? China, Captive or Free. He was writing it in the 1920 time frame, a little bit after World War II, but he's always going back to World War I. He's always going back to a little bit of pre-World War I, and how things that were done then impacted China negatively, big time negatively. Now, he was a grand supporter of China, but he also seems to be all over the map. He's supporting Japan, he's supporting Germany. I don't think the guy knew his own mind. But somehow, he was able to get the attention of the politicians. I think we could probably assume that the politicians would love to hear the story told to them by a missionary, because then when they go back to their districts, and this is whether it's England or the United States, they could go say, "Well, Reverend so-and-so said this and that, and that's what we're basing our policies on." So they did this and that. What's interesting is that prior to World War I, Germany thought it best for Germany to play a little catch-up in the Far East, whereas France and England and Holland, the Dutch, were in there for quite some time in that region and extracting all sorts of commercial material wealth out of the Far East. And Germany said, "You know what, it's about time we get some of this action." So they went to China and they asked for concessions. And China said, "Sure, why not? Take the whole Shantung Peninsula, we don't mind." And Japan was alerted to this because Japan always thinks that the whole Far East is her bailiwick. when indeed, if you look at history, it never was. It never was. Japan historically couldn't even keep Korea in check, if you look at it. Japan started getting high and mighty when she beat the pants off of Russia and Port Arthur, and she did her stuff up in Manchuria. Then she started getting high and mighty, and she made sure her 2 cents was part of the deals made by China concerning Germany. She made sure that she was consulted, this is Japan, and that she had her toehold in China. So fast forward, you get World War One. World War One, Germany's on the other side of the Allies. Now, the Allies were supposedly friendly with China, and they were friendly with Japan. So this caused all sorts of dilemmas for the nations, but it never adversely affected them much, except for Germany. Germany was summarily kicked out of the area. And pretty much Japan led that charge. And the book that I'm talking about, China, Captive or Free, constantly refers to treaties and quotes from them that allowed Japan to have this amount of influence in the area, great amount. And the author, Reed, is never truly for that, but he will say, but listen, Japan's the strong guy. He's the, so they should get it, this, that. He makes all sorts of apologies for Japanese domination in the area. He would always be apologetic. Anyway, long and the short of it is that Germany was read the Riot Act by Japan and others. And I think we may have to include the United States in this. Listen, you got 9 months or something like that. Pick up the pieces and get out of here. And in Japan, by the way, besides having all of this China stuff, you can also have everything north of the equator, which answers for me why they were in those islands during World War II in the first place. Because, he would say, he would read, we're going to have a battle on the island of Uchiwachi, and there's a big Japanese contingent, colony, cities, population on the island of Uchi. How did these Japanese get here? How did they get such control? Well, we gave it to them. He said, you can have everything north of the equator. Now, you go look at a map, the equator goes right through Singapore. Right through Singapore. So that's how far down the globe, and then how far up the globe Japan could have. She got all those islands in the Pacific. And we gave it to her. So and therefore they were much better equipped to fight us when it came to fighting us. So we can look to those appeasements for the root cause of why American soldiers had to die in the Pacific. The appeasements to the brutal Japanese at the time, and they were brutal, which points out that as I was trying to get myself familiar with World War II in the Far East, that's when I became familiar with General Joe Stilwell, famously known as Vinegar Joe, a guy from my neighborhood back in the States, Yonkers, Joe Stilwell. Anyway, he was quite the general. And one thing he could do, he could tolerate the Asians. A lot a lot of the big shots didn't want to be bothered with the Asians. They were considered inferior. They wanted to bother themselves with the European nations. They figured that's where the big payoff was going to come in career improvements. So they didn't want to muck around with China and Japan and those kind of places, Philippines. But Joe Stilwell, he was a fighting man. And he was okay with the assignments they gave him. He went over there. But in reading about his assignments, you find out that Japan is all over China. They got freaking armies in the middle of China. And this is in the 30s. Of course, they're all up and down the seaboard. They were infiltrating the seaboard since they kicked Germany out of the peninsula. So China was probably the number one military force not China, Japan was probably the number one military force within China at the time. And Joe Stilwell was given the job of being the top advisor to the Chinese, how to deal with these Japanese on a military basis. But he found that he could not get two Chinese to agree with each other. The Chinese had different armies. He also had the communists, they had the republics, the Mao Tse-Tungs of the world, they had the Chiang Kai-sheks of the world, and Stilwell had to deal with all of this crap. But eventually, World War II does take off. Eventually, we have the Philippines, and eventually we have things like Guadalcanal and Midway. Of course, we have Pearl Harbor, Okinawa, Iwo Jima. We have all these things, and it's now incumbent on the Allies to really wake up and do something in the Far East, because Japan's about ready to take the whole freaking place over. Okay? Japan's about ready to take over India. Not to say anything about Burma or Indonesia or all that stuff. Thailand, but they never got Thailand. It's an interesting point. Vietnam, Cambodia, they all came under the Japanese boot. So Joe Stilwell was given the task to get things working so that we can save that part of India that Japan was really, really hungering for. They were licking their chops. They were going to get that part of India that we would associate with just above Bangladesh, the Calcutta area, the part of India where those rivers that flow out of the Himalayas, the Brahmaputra and a few others, come into the coasts of India and flood the Bay of Bengal. Japan was right there. They were right there. They were about ready to do it. Joe Stilwell came on the scene, and he, with his British allies who were enmassed in that place of India, Far East India and North, they put an end to that. Of course, they did the fly over the hump, which was to get supplies from India over the Himalayas and into an area of China where they could be useful to the Chinese armies. And then, of course, once it landed there, the Chinese had a fight over who was going to get that stuff. It must have been extremely frustrating to Stilwell to have all of that going on while he was working real hard to make it happen. And by the way, while he was busting his butt trying to make this happen, by then MacArthur had been flown out of the Philippines and put out of harm's way. He was down, I believe he was down in Canberra, where the the Allies had their headquarters. So he was totally out of harm's way. Stilwell was right in the thick of it, but of course MacArthur is the one everybody knows about and talks about. MacArthur never fought. Well, maybe in his earlier, younger service, he may have actually fought. But once we were in World War II, he wasn't fighting anymore. Anyway, eventually, Stilwell is returned to the United States, and the war may or may not have been over by then. But he's back there. Until giving you a little Stilwell background. He's given command of an army. I don't know which one, the Sixth Army or something. But he doesn't survive the war, but for a couple of years. And what I'm thinking that he died prematurely because of being burnt out by the aggravation that he got by trying to mediate between the Chinese, the Americans, the British, the Japanese. He got worn out. And 2 years after he left the theaters, and I'm not sure if he had been separated from the army yet. By the way, I believe he was a 3-star general. At the very least. It could have been more. But slight man, too. He wasn't very big or anything. He was kind of what we would call, what's the word when you're slight in build? I don't know. Anyway, he marched that Burma Trail on foot, pushing through the jungles, the diseases, he and his men. He didn't slurk it. He didn't try to avoid the hard times. He was there with his men. MacArthur was on his PT boat, fleeing as fast as he could. And then, don't get me wrong, I kind of like MacArthur as an historical figure, I mean, I believe that his heart was in the right place, although he was a nasty, aristocratic type, upper class type, nasty. He hated the lower classes. And they were all slime to him. If you look at the hats he designed for himself, those army hats, he designed one with a much, much larger brow, looked like this, so everybody could see how important he was. And I'm not a big fan of Harry Truman either. I do kind of wish he would have smacked him around when MacArthur got a little out of line there in the Korean situation. It'd have been nice to see old Harry step up to him and smack him around. And he wasn't a big guy, MacArthur. I think he was 5'7". And Truman certainly was probably more than that. And like I said, not a big fan of Truman. He was a retail clerk. Come on. Now he's running the world. Give me a break. How does that happen? So that should be enough on these books. We got Gertrude Bell pegged as one of these groupies. She was an Arabian groupie. We have Reed as one of these missionaries who was, as soon as they got into the culture, that culture was now right, and the other culture, meaning American, because he was an American, is wrong. And we have, on the other hand, we talked a little bit about T.E. Lawrence, who, in my estimation, was always the real deal. A man we could admire. Stilwell, another man, the real deal, a man we could admire. And the tragedy is, of course, with those is that Lawrence died so prematurely. Because I think, as I said in the previous talk that if Lawrence had lived, he died in 35, if he had lived pre-World War II, I think Adolf would have been gone long before Poland, long before, maybe even long before Czechoslovakia, because Lawrence had everybody's ear who meant anything. He had their ears. He was no wishy-washy Neville Chamberlain, you know. He told it like it is, and he didn't care who he was telling it to. And I do think there's a strong possibility we would have had a less severe World War II if Lawrence hadn't run into that accident on his motorcycle. And he's not the fault on that accident either. It was those two youths riding side by side that he couldn't avoid, swerved and crashed and died. Anyway, that's getting carried away for this discussion. This is kind of long. This is like 50 minutes. So listen, thanks for listening. I'll check and see how it went with making this a not made for children posting. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks for watching.